So I suspect that the clutch is completely disintegrated in this car. Symptoms include letting out on the clutch pedal and the car doesn't go anywhere and you can't get it into first gear. So we pulled the starter off and took a look inside, and I can't really see anything because the pressure plate covers up the clutch, but I'm sure the clutch is scattered inside. If you take a close look, you can see all fibrous materials that are stuck all over where this oil has been leaking out. And even that axle shaft is very hairy, and there is tons of fibers that are just all over the place. So if I had to guess, I'm gonna say the clutch is gone. Thinking of removing this transmission right now. So a couple things we gotta do here. Obviously disconnect battery so we can remove the starter. We did that. 12 mil bolt or nut for the power cable, and then two 14mm bolts for the actual housing, and then one clip for your signal wire. Gonna mostly be into 12 mil, 14 mil, and 17 mil bolts on this car. That's just the sizes they use. And then we need a transmission jack, and I'm just looking to see what we're gonna need to take off this shifter linkage up in here. Looks like it's just basically bolts. We got, looks like 12 mil bolts that just come apart, and then that linkage comes off. We need to take the exhaust down so that we can remove the drive shaft that's underneath of all these shields. And then basically we need to probably take the wheels off, pull the suspension, the steering knuckle out so we can pop these axles out, take the frame off, stick a jack underneath of it, do all the bell housing bolts, and drop this thing down. So we're just going to take this this cylinder off so that, well, we got to take it off when we're pulling the transmission because the hydraulic line is still attached, and I'm not going to open up the system. So we just take these bolts out, remove this thing, set it to the side, and then we'll be, I'm going to be undoing these two electrical connectors on this other side. There'll be speed sensors right there, this connector and this connector. And then also it appears that we have a ground wire right here, a little 10 mil. And we'll be taking this wishbone mount off. And that'll give us a little bit of room, be able to access some of the bolts from up top, the bell housing bolts. And just gonna give it a look over to see if there's anything else that may need to come off. It looks like this bracket. Nope, actually that's gonna stay, but I might just undo that to push it out of the way to gain access to some other things. Now these two bolts that hold this cylinder on are 14mm bolts. So it's just on a flex line. You can just sort of zip tie it out of the way, move it out of the way, and we'll undo these. Oops. I knew that was going to happen. .14 millimeter bolt and nut. Probably just get in here with like an impact gun if you wanted to, but so there we go. We got this dog bone mount out. Just 14 millimeter, you got 2 bolts and a nut. Okay, so in order to undo this connector, there's just a tab that you push down on here. That's going to allow you to release the gray connector lock and push it forwards. And then we need to pry up on this locking tab slightly to allow this retainer bracket to come off to get the harness off. Now, you may not have to take that off. I'm just taking it off to gain room. I'm going to unplug some of these things so I can flop this harness back. And looks like we got a vent right here that's for the transmission as well. So I'm just going to undo it probably off of here and then droop that down. I'll probably just put a zip tie on all those cables to keep them all nice and organized and out of the way so they don't catch on anything. Looks like we have just 2 clips on this thing. Patience is key if you're trying to save these things. There you go, you can just see there's 2 tabs on the side that need to be pushed in. So that's going to get zip tied down there with everything else. And I'll probably end up zip tying that thing up too, just to get everything out of the way. We don't want anything catching when it comes down. Okay, so there's a couple 14mm bolts that go in here that hold the bell housing to the engine block. So what I'm going to do is just break those free. And these are the ones that are a little more difficult to access from underneath. Really, they're not, but compared to the ones that are on the very bottom. That way, you can just, when the axles are out and you got the stand all set up, you don't have to lower the car back down and break these free or whatever. You can just reach up in there and take them out. Any of the bolts that I take off for the bracket that holds those 2 connectors, and also the bracket or the cylinder here, I just put the bolts back in it. So that way they you can see they're in the bell housing. I guess they're they're on the one's on the bell housing, one's on the engine block, and then that way you don't lose them, you know where they go. Or you could just stay organized. But I try to stick them back in the original places. Okay, so take your front wheels off. We need to get these axles out now. And 19mm bolts or nuts for the wheels, get those off. 14mm bolts for the brake caliper, get that off, hang them up. Then we got 17mm bolts for the pad bracket here. So take those off, and then you should be at this point. Now we need to remove this 12mm bolt that holds the harness to the body, and also just this clip. You can see we've just got some retention tabs there, and then some top and bottom. So I just removed that right off the strut. And that's going to give us lots of room so that when we take these bolts out here and let the knuckle come down so we can get the axle out, we don't wreck this. So the next thing that we need to do is, we got 2 things left. We need to remove these bolts here, and then also we have this axle nut that we need to undo and get the axle free from the bearing. It'll be splined together, and a lot of times the splines get stuck together. So you can use a hammer and a punch if it's stuck, or if you have the luxury of using an air hammer, that's my go-to tool. So let's see what size socket that is for those strut bolts. I'm guessing they're either a 21 or 19. They look like 21, but they are 19. So yep, 19 on both sides. Grab yourself either 2 sockets and ratchets or a breaker bar or wrenches or anything to hold that. I'm going to use an impact gun, and we'll get those off. So socket, even though it's the right size, it's too thick. So All right guys, so 32 millimeter axle nut. We get those axle nuts off. Now these shafts were nice and clean and they're free, so I was able to pull the knuckle down, slip the axle out, and just take it right out. You don't have to take the tie rod end off or any of that stuff. Keep in mind though, I just wanted to let you know that the upper strut bolt is actually a eccentric bolt for your camber adjustment. And now this knuckle here is very rusty, so I can see the outline of exactly where the knuckle needs to go back. But if you live somewhere that you're not gonna be able to tell where the knuckle was originally sitting before you take it apart, just take a paint pen or a punch or something, mark that bolt in correlation to where it sits before you take it out. And then another thing you could do is just use a paint pen or scribe a line along the knuckle of where it sits in the strut assembly itself. That's going to save you for reassembly. All right, so we got to remove a little shield under here so that I can take this exhaust off. The bolts that hold this flange together up here are real crusty, so what I like to do is just take my Sawzall, make a clean cut. I'm going to cut it right here. Still have lots of room to access the area when I go to weld it back together. And then we're going to drop this exhaust off. I think actually what I'm going to do before I fire up this torch is take these axles out. I just kind of completely missed that step, but let's get the pry bar, do that right now. They're super easy to take out. You can just get a little pry bar in there and you should be able to just pop them out. There'll be a sort of a clip that holds them in. I may have to get my bigger bar. There we go. So just like that. Careful it doesn't drip oil all over your face like I just had. Could drain this thing before we take it out, but I'm not too worried. And then we'll carefully set these over to the side because we don't want to damage these surfaces. That's where the oil seal mates against. So that can hang out there, and we'll do this other side. You can see we've had an axle seal that was leaking there for a while. It's all covered in fuzz. I'm gonna get where you are here. Yeah, it's just a little circlip that holds that axle in place. You can see there's the clip right there. When you go to install these things, there's a bottom to the clip right there. So make sure you can see how much it droops down. When you go to install them, make sure the cutout is towards the bottom so that this clip doesn't get caught on the gears as it's going in. I've had them where it'll chew off part of that clip or it gets stuck. So.
No need to.
Okay. All right, just gonna give this a little cut. Okay, so I had to heat up that 14 millimeter bolt. The thing with exhaust bolts and stuff like that, threads distort over time, they get rusty. For some reason, they're always a real pain to deal with, so heat that one up. You can see this bracket has a little bit of a hook to it, a little curve, so it's gonna catch that. And then I'm just gonna use a transmission jack to hold this side up, and then you've seen that I already disconnected this one hanger back here. And I've disconnected one of two of the hangers for the muffler. So really we just have this easy to access one that's sitting back here. So once we get this thing lowered down here in a second, I'll just come back here, unhook it, and then we'll be able to get the whole exhaust system down in one piece. All right, so these pliers are super helpful, except for this long thing. Okay, so do you want to just undo that valve there, lefty loosey. Yeah. So you can see that secondary cat where I've cut, there's no oxygen sensors. They are up front. I believe the cats are probably part of the manifold. So get this thing off and then we can get that shield off. Now we can get this shield off here so that we can access the drive shaft hanger bearing, and we'll be able to get this drive shaft out. Then we'll start working on those mounts. Grab myself a pry bar, a paint marker, and also we got this long 12mm wrench here. So we got 4 12mm bolt or nuts that are attached to these studs that are pressed into the drive shaft, and then 2 14mm bolts for the hanger bearing. Now I'm just going to give this thing a mark with some paint so that I know where it goes. A lot of times it doesn't really matter that much, but for balancing purposes and all that stuff, I like to try to make sure it goes back where it came off of. So there we go, I can see where that is. Now I'm just going to stick my pry bar in here to keep this from spinning because it's just going to spin freely. And I'll break these free. We'll go around, break all the other ones off, break them free, not break them off, break them free. Now, I just loosen those off to the point where I'll be able to take them out by hand. You can see that even though we have the bolts out back there, it's still stuck on there. So I got to use a mallet to break that free. And then the front just slides in. It's just a spline shaft that slides in. So I just want it to be enough where I can just take these out by hand once I get that broken off, and then I can slide the whole thing out. Don't use a regular hammer. Use a mallet like that. You can use a hammer, but you run the risk of denting things. Whatever you do, don't hammer on the shaft because it's hollow inside. So if you get a ding in that or bend in it, there's a good chance it's going to shake when you put it all back together and go to drive it down the road. Now we can take these bolts out. Like I say, they're nice and loose. We'll slide this out, and oil's probably, oh, it didn't. If you're wondering from the beginning why I didn't just drain the oil, it's because I don't have the proper Torx socket. The biggest one in my set is 65 or a 60, and I think that's either a 65 or a 70. So, okay, so we're just taking this bolt out of the shifter linkage right now. It's just 12 mil on both sides, and then once we get that out, we can take this other shaft off, and it's also 12mm. Supporting the transmission. You can see that I have the transmission jack with the jack stand on there, and it's just holding the tranny up to take the weight off, so that when I take all of this subframe off, then it's not gonna come falling down with it. But yeah, all 14mm bolts. So we got 2 here, 2 here. I guess these are 17s, sorry, I lied. 2 17s. And then we got these two nuts here that are 14 millimeter. So let's get at her. Grab my 17 mil socket and we'll get that last one off. Let's get to pulling some of these bolts off. So you can see that I've just put the stand here. I'm waiting for the actual engine stand from Rotary. They have like a tripod stand. It's perfect for this exact application, but basically I got this here because the engine mounts are located near the back of the engine. So once we take the transmission off, the weight of the engine is going to make it want to fall forwards. Not really supposed to be using the exhaust to hold it up, but it's not a lot of weight. It's just the balance of it. So I'm not too concerned. There's probably a tool that goes across like the strut that will, the struts that will brace that. So, just trying to get in here. You can see like that's a stud, but the nut gets all jammed up because it's rusty and takes the whole stud out. There's supposed to be like some alignment studs that help that go in properly, but just looking to see. It looks like we have some actual, if I had to guess, those are alignment dowels that are in there. And looks like they're pretty crusty. I have to try to get some bar or something to split the transmission bell housing and the block. I'm gonna give it a bunch of wiggling and try to get that to work, but might end up getting stuck. Oh, it's coming.
Wiggle it a bit.
Okay, so I think I'm gonna pump this engine up a little bit. Try to get this as level as we can get it. I see it's coming. Right. Now, we gotta come down with this a little bit. Now, you usually want these things strapped up so they don't fall off. We just take our time here, come down slowly, keep a hand on it. There we go. So, got this thing out now. It's flopping around on here like a fish out of water. What I'm gonna do is just try to use these little things here. I guess that doesn't really do. All right, so we got the clutch off. We can see we got the pressure plate. This is actually the clutch disc itself with the friction material. Obviously not much left of that. And there's absolutely no friction material left whatsoever. And that's what I was talking about, that fiberglass material that you see sort of escaped out of the bell housing and was stuck all over places is this stuff. And it just sticks to everything, and then oil covers it. You could really, I noticed it all along here when it first came in. So I knew that the clutch was probably scattered. Makes sense. The thing doesn't move in whatever gear, so obviously the clutch isn't engaged. You just let your foot right off the clutch pedal and it doesn't do anything. Now, he did say that before this happened, he wasn't able to get it into first gear, and he always had to start driving in second, and that's why the clutch probably went out of it. But I'm not 100% sure. I'm gonna have to go through and check the transmission and make sure that it is going through all the gears and everything seems like it feels good. I couldn't get it to go into first, probably because of the clutch. There's a gate that won't let you put it in first gear unless you put your foot on the clutch, and if the clutch isn't engaging or disengaging, then you probably can't get it into first gear. So I'll have to take a look at it. You can hear this clutch release bearing. It sounds like absolute garbage. So yeah, the flywheel, seeing as the clutch material is completely gone, you can see the grooves in the actual flywheel itself, and some bluing spots. It's been getting hot, so this thing's gonna have to get taken off and sent to the machine shop, where they will remove the dowel pins until it's flat surface and skim it. They will remachine that surface to a true surface. So one thing that can happen is if you don't get that machined or replaced, you can get chattering. That'll happen when you go to engage the clutch, and you'll feel it in the car like shaking. And it's not nice. So you can spend all that time, and if you don't get it machined or replaced, you're just asking for trouble. So if you got any questions, throw them down in the comments below, and give this video a thumbs up. And if you like the channel and you want to see more content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.